council, have retired mostly business person from financial services. And again, thank you all for your attendance here.
I like how you said retired mostly. Hi, I'm Ken Ampey. I'm the Vice Chair of SCHEV Council. Happy to see you all today.
I'm Katie Webb, and I serve as Secretary of the Council. And it's very nice to be with you all today. Thank you for joining with us.
I'm Peter Blake, Director of SCHEV, and it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you, President Abdullah.
John Broderick, now a member of SCHEV.
Tim Sands, President of Virginia Tech. It's great to be here.
Brian Hemphill, President of Old Dominion University.
Porter Brandon, President at Thomas Nelson Community College.
I'm Lynn LaPree, and I'm the interim president of Radford University.
Jeff Smith.
Jenny O'Halloran, council member.
Greg Washington, President of George Mason University.
Good afternoon. Debbie Saito, President of Richard Bland College.
Good morning. I'm Adam Hutchison, President of Virginia Highlands Community College.
Good afternoon. Donna Henry, and I'm the Chancellor at the University of Virginia's College at Wise.
Good afternoon. Cedric Wins, Superintendent, Virginia Military Institute.
Alex Arriaga, Council Member at SCHEV.
Good afternoon. John Alger, President of James Madison University.
I'm Henry Light. I'm on SCHEV.
Mirza Beg, SCHEV member.
Good afternoon. Thaddeus Solomon, SCHEV member.
Mike Rao, I serve as president at VCU and VCU Health System.
Stephen Moray, council member.
And Makola Abdullah, president, Virginia State University.
Thank you. Yes, we've got a few folks on the screen here who are joining us virtually. Let's see, we got Fran. Do you want to say hello?
Good afternoon, Fran Bradford, Deputy Secretary of Education, and look forward to hearing one of the most important higher ed conversations of any year. So thanks.
Okay. Who else do we have on our virtual screen here?
I am Muriel Mickles, and I am the Enrollment President at Danville Community College, and I'm glad to be here this afternoon. Thank you.
Welcome.
Ron Adams Gaston. I'm President of Norfolk State University. Glad to be with you.
Pleasure.
Hi, I'm Troy, President at the University of Mary Washington. Very happy to be with you.
Great to have you.
Jim White, President of the University of Virginia. It's good to see all of you.
Hi, Jim. All right. I think we are good.
You're good.
All right. So we wanted to start with just kind of an informal discussion. It's a treat. I'll speak on behalf of council members. It's a treat to actually see so many people who are involved in the day-to-day activities that we hope to support. And so it's hugely valuable for us to be able to take advantage of the opportunity to hear firsthand, what's going on out there as you all reopen and begin this new school year. So I just wanted to kind of open it wide up and get some thoughts to help guide while we think about how to prioritize the many activities that we think about and work on this upcoming budget recommendations and policy recommendations and things along those lines. So who would like to share a little bit about what's going on?
Well, I'll just kick it off by saying it was a very interesting opening for us to the fall semester. I went from getting into what was, becoming and now is very much, I hope, the top of the peak of COVID cases. I was rounding this morning in our medical respiratory ICU. My heart goes out to the many, many patients that we have that are COVID positive. I don't mind factually telling you that most of them are not vaccinated. I also don't mind telling you that we have not got a single patient on a ventilator who is vaccinated. We are having some trouble with patients who are vaccinated but who have had challenges that are otherwise, meaning they're transplantation patients or cancer patients and such, and the vaccine doesn't take as well for a lot of different reasons. Right into a couple of weeks ago starting school at VCU, and I have never seen more students more excited, more compliant. We did our student convocation outside, and I have never seen more students show up at student convocation. It was the top attended event that top attended student convocation in all of the university's history. And more students said to me, thank you for having school. Thank you for not shutting us down. We need to be here. This is the way that we are motivated. And lots of other stories that go with that. At one point it was anecdotes, and then it piled up and became data. It's very clear that many people, most people really need that interaction. The other thing that's very obvious, Madam Chair, is just the incredible wave of change that we're in the middle of. I think students are really looking to us as public institutions of higher education to meet them where they are, to adapt, and really be prepared to make changes in the ways in which we have done things. And so I'm thinking a lot about that right now. I've asked my team to give a lot of thought to that. I really think that the economy of the future, economic development in the future is going to be very, very different than it has been in the past. I've asked Stephen to sort of partner with me and help me understand how best to characterize that, be certain that we're moving in the right direction, but I do not think that going back to the ways in which most successful economies were developed is likely to be our future going forward. And I think if we can all in unison basically lock arms and decide how higher education can play the most significant role higher education has ever played in the Commonwealth of Virginia in advancing economic opportunity for more people, for all people, I think we'll be in a better place. But I mean, that's kind of a message to say, I think we're all going to have to move a whole lot faster. We're all going to have to think about the purposes of our policies and our processes and determine whether or not some of the things that students refer to and faculty and others refer to us as being bureaucratic, whether or not we may need to make some changes.
And so do you think some of the bigger shifts are programmatic ones, or are they, more related to program delivery, or how,
It's an excellent question. I'd let my colleagues respond because I'm talking way too much, but I would say it's a combination of all of that. I think the program areas are going to have to be a whole lot more interdisciplinary. One good example is I had a meeting with Fortune 100 CEOs of our area in Richmond this morning at 7 o'clock, and one of our conversations was about the fact that we're probably never going to have the number of computer science majors, cover your ears, Stephen, that we need. But in the meantime, can we at least be certain that we certify people as digitally literate? And that could be 3-4 course sequences or whatever. I think that's a big part of it, Marge. But the other thing I'm really picking up on is that, and I've watched this happen gradually over the last few years, many students, and I would say increasingly many students need to be more engaged, to learn and understand why what they're learning is meaningful to them. We think we know, but the reality is it's not going to make it to them. They're not going to be as motivated if they're not as deeply engaged in understanding the purposes of why they have to know so much of what we think they need to know.
Tim, there we go.
Oh, well, I just wanted to echo what Mike said. Everybody's really excited at Virginia Tech. The 37,000 students are so glad to be back in person. We've got 10,000 living on our Blacksburg campus, and the energy is palpable. The excitement about being back is really special. Of course, it's like two freshman classes. We've talked about that nationally, and you can feel it. It just feels like a little raw and a little vulnerable and a little fragile, but we so far kept the wheels on. One thing I wanted to mention is that we've had some big outdoor gatherings without masks, certainly encourage masks. One of them was, probably 7,000 in Lane Stadium 10 days ago. and we haven't seen any signal from COVID. No change, average about 6 cases a day, 2% positivity. And we had to wait a few more days, but I think one of the things we've learned is that outdoor gatherings by themselves do not appear to be risky. And so we will update you on that as our data is collected, but it's hopeful there. Overall, just people are glad to be back, faculty are glad to be back. There are some challenges, though, with COVID, and it's not, for example, it's not, at Virginia Tech, it's not on campus. It's the K through 12 system, and a lot of students are under 12. Kids of our employees and some of our grad students are now out of school, and we're struggling with this accommodation issue again, like we did last year.
So we're really excited at Virginia State. Same as I think everyone, the students are really excited to be back on campus. I think it's showing in that our enrollment will be higher this year than it was last year. We think a lot of the young people that didn't decide to come last year are coming back now. We decided to mandate the vaccine, although we did it later than most. And so we had students already starting to move in before we decided to mandate the vaccine. And so we are currently working through that, trying to raise our vaccine positivity rates. With students, we're at about 65%, and trying to move that number higher. We've got a big push this week to do just that. Our faculty and staff are at about 85%, so we're doing good with them and trying to move those numbers also. But with the numbers continuing to go up in terms of number of cases, it's created a level of anxiety on campus in Virginia and in the world that I'm not sure that vaccinated individuals need to have, but it seems as if those are the people who are the most anxious. Right? So by and large, our vaccinated faculty and staff are the ones who are the most concerned about the level of vaccination on campus, and so we continue to move that forward. But we're really excited. It's a great time to be at Virginia State, and I concur with all that my colleagues have said about the disruption that has happened in higher education because of COVID, and that we know that these disruptions will be here for quite a while.
So Richard Bland is a small rural campus, and for small colleges, I think there is a tendency toward enrollment decline. That's what we're experiencing. We're down about between 5 and 10%. Dual enrollment and some of the other numbers haven't settled out yet. I would share the positivity on the part of students, not COVID positivity, but positive mental attitude. We have been able to manage the cases that have been reported, have been identified to date. I like Tim Sand's adjective, fragile. It does feel fragile, even though there is normalcy as we watch athletics resume, as we watch events resume. There is a sense of how long is that going to last. I would say that one thing we expect will not change is the variety of options that our students have to choose from in deciding whether they are going to be partly online, whether they are going to be hybrid, whether they are going to be in-seat. And if there is a positive to come out of the pandemic, I think it's just that. I think students learn in different ways. We had many residential students who said they discovered that they like online learning. So they're living in residence halls and primarily taking online courses so they can work and take care of other family responsibilities. So there is a great deal more flexibility, and at least it appears that that is something that will need to hold even after the pandemic is hopefully not presenting the same challenges that it does today.
And also, council members, please feel free to, interject and ask specific questions if something comes to mind.
You mentioned dual enrollment, and that's a matter that I am deeply concerned about. I'd like to hear from you and your colleagues about the pros and cons of dual enrollment, and to also understand perhaps the differences that your perspectives may take, whether you're a community college or a four-year institution.
So I am a big proponent of dual enrollment. It saves families money. It gives students the opportunity to get a leg up and complete some college credit. We have a wonderful program with Petersburg High School that allows students to, if they choose, complete both their junior and senior year coursework on the Richard Bland campus. So they graduate with a high school diploma and a college degree. And for so many students, this is a great opportunity for them if they are financially challenged, if they just need the added support that we can provide on a two-year college campus. It gives them that wraparound support that can make the difference for them to bridge high school and college. So I would just say that I think dual enrollment can be challenging in terms of the logistics that have to be in place to make it an effective collaboration between the high school and the college. But when it works effectively, it is a tremendous benefit to those students, their families, and I believe the Commonwealth.
And I was going to share, I wish I could be objective, but I'm such a proponent for dual enrollment, and for some of the very same reasons. You know, when you look at some of our data and you see how many of the students who are involved in dual enrollment and go on to, whether they continue at a two-year college and go on to a four-year institution, and just some of the outcomes, you know, their key performance indicators as far as their credit accumulation, their retention rates and graduation rates, the investment is just so incredible. And it is a challenge, and to get it working ideally, there can be challenges, but the payoffs, I think, for the students and their families and for the Commonwealth are just invaluable. And I've worked in a number of different states that have different dual enrollment models in place, but one of the things that I think is consistent is what you see as the outcomes for those students who have access to college education earlier, and their ability to maintain, to be retained in college and to graduate. The rates are just always higher. And so there are some challenges, right? There's always challenges, but I think the outcomes, when you look at dual enrollment programs, the student outcomes are just incredible. Well, some of the challenges, and I'll speak of the ones that I've seen here so far, our teacher credentialing process has been one of the challenges to get more teachers credentialed to teach. And I have to say, what's interesting is where Thomas Nelson, our service area, we serve 6 different areas. And it's a challenge in some areas and less of a challenge in others, but being able to get more and more, as many as we would like to have teachers' credentials at the high school so that we can have dual enrollment be accessible to more students. That has been one of the challenges, getting teachers the credentials or the additional credits that they may need to meet the qualifications for teaching. That has been one of the ones that I think has been the most significant. The logistics, I don't think, are a huge issue. I think that's something that we can manage, but the teacher credentialing process has been one of the challenges that prevents us from having similar success in some areas that we do see in others.
If I may, just an open question for the presidents that have joined us here. Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate your input. Just curious, how many of you folks are tracking academic outcomes by type of method of teaching, whether it's virtual versus hybrid versus in-person? Are we seeing different outcomes for students? And then what is the biggest change in pedagogy that you folks have seen as a result of the pandemic? This is an open question to all of you.
So we've been tracking it very closely, and it looks like there's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 30% of students who are have a performance that's significantly below their in-person performance. So this is the numbers for Mason. It's about 30% of our students have a lower performance than what they normally would have had in person online. So we've seen that disparity. We've actually seen there are some cohorts of students that have increased, and we've seen significant differences by ethnicity. Okay, and so the reality is that the mantra for us going forward is flexibility. we recognize that there is no one mode that's going to work for everybody. And when accessibility is a big part of what what you want to give to the Commonwealth, that flexibility demands, that accessibility demands that we be flexible to meet the students where they are. And what that means for us is that we're going to have more modes of engagement going forward, not fewer. So we're not going to abandon buildings. We're not going to abandon in person. We're going to have more hybrid opportunities, more online opportunities to round out the opportunities that we already have in place. For us, the students have told us very clearly that they want to be on campus. And I want to say this in as cogent a way as I possibly can. They want to be on campus, but not all of them necessarily want to be in class. So there is indeed a difference. And I feel very strongly that now more than ever, the human interaction part of this is much more important for them and much more important for us than I would have ever known possible, even when we were primarily in person. You don't know how important something is until you've had to go without it for a period of time. So I've always been a strong proponent for online education. I still am. It's just not going to be the only thing we do going forward. It's going to be a mix of opportunities that we have to offer.
I could echo that, actually. What we saw was a difference in grades, in what year the students were. Our juniors and seniors did very well. We actually saw that they held their own in terms of online coursework. Their grade point averages were about the same. Where we're seeing the struggle is with the freshmen. That was the class that now we're starting to look at in terms of who stayed, whose grade point averages were equal or equivalent to what we would have expected in the past. And we're seeing some of those challenges in those freshmen, now sophomores. And what we're hearing, and this is somewhat anecdotally, but we're trying to gather some of this qualitative data as well from our faculty, is they're concerned about a knowledge gap, that while their GPAs may have held, the retention of the materials, particularly in the hard sciences, is not maybe where we wanted it to be. And we're seeing some of those challenges too, and how we as an institution can shore up the support services for the students. So it's not just what our faculty are doing, although that is absolutely critical, and to what they're able to do both in and out of the classroom, but how we're building those support services in to account for what may be some learning challenges that we have in sophomores and then moving up through the rest of their career. So that's been something we've noticed on our campus as well, just to echo.
I might just add, I think that it's not one size fits all. What we saw is overall the student satisfaction rates were about the same, but it certainly varied from course to course. So courses that have a significant lab component, experiential learning, teamwork, those were some of the ones that the faculty certainly adjusted on the fly as best they could, but that's where they felt that there was a substantive difference. And so I think, as my colleagues have said, there are certain types of classes that perhaps lend themselves more than others to that virtual environment. And of course, faculty are getting better at this now that they've had the experience and the support to figure out how to do it better. But I'm reminded, many years ago, I was working at the American Association of University Professors, going through their files as online education was starting to become a big deal. And they were doing a sort of policy report. And I was reading all these fascinating memos from 40 or 50 years before that said, brick and mortar institutions are going to go by the wayside because there's this incredible new technology called television. And I was reading these predictions that colleges would go away and students would get all of their content sitting in front of a TV set. Well, obviously that didn't happen. And I don't think it's going to happen now. So, a lot of the learning takes place, and it's not just in classes, but we don't want to forget student organizations and the totality of the student experience that is also extremely important. And I think that's something we are finding this fall. The students are really excited to be able to have those opportunities again, too.
You know, I think if I could add, and I'm going to say the exact same thing that my colleagues did, so I should probably be quiet. There's a part of the informal educational experience that we were finding that we're really missing, that we were missing last year at Virginia State, where even if students had a decent in-class experience, that the idea of professors as mentors, professors as surrogate parents, staff members as surrogate parents, the kind of informal conversation that a faculty member might have with a student after class. Come on, Jimmy, we need you to pick it up, were the kinds of things that we're missing really across the board. And so it really highlighted the importance of informal engagement as a way to produce positive outcomes, right? That for many of our professors, it's that extra lean in that helps the students to perform in their courses and be good in their courses. And without that, even the best of professors sometimes struggled getting the outcomes that they were looking for. And so, and I think my colleagues, I think they're all saying, you know, very similar things, but that was something that we noticed. And we've asked our faculty to become better in hybrid situations with informal communication, but to start to actively think about how to engage students in different ways online and in hybrid situations. Tim, Donna?
Where's Donna? Oh, there she is. Go ahead. Oh, one red flag that popped up this week at Virginia Tech that I didn't anticipate, but I'm not surprised by, is that our first-year students, just incoming, their math readiness is not there. And it was from a qualification, from a transcript point of view, test scores, GPA, no difference, but they just aren't as ready as they usually are with math.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, we, in fall of 19, rolled out a cooperation with Apple, and we rolled out iPads for all of our students. And as we transitioned into the pandemic, it gave our faculty the knowledge of a similar platform for all students, including faculty and staff at the college. And that led to some very creative ways to use technology to deliver classrooms that all went virtual. But then as we've come back and had some hybrid classes, faculty were able to say, well, this really worked well. We're going to continue to use it. And a great example was in foreign language, where faculty were really concerned about the pandemic and how they were going to teach. But having the video conferencing technology and the ability to meet with students, they felt that that was something that they've now just incorporated into even their face-to-face work so that they can get some of that one-on-one work with their students. And in the science labs, while the labs weren't the same when they were totally online, they're incorporating that technology into their face-to-face labs because the students can real-time put in the data, see how the things work, and if the lab isn't right, they can go back and do it again and get that learning just in time. So I think we're going to see what works well, what technology we keep, what things could work hybrid. And I think we're all in total agreement with the fact that the juniors and seniors did much better in the online environment than first and second year students. So we're doubling down to get those students on campus, face-to-face, and leaving more of the hybrid in the junior and senior years.
I'll just mention a couple of comments, and some things have already been mentioned. But one, with our first-year students, a dramatic impact in terms of, as we're looking at the retention from last year to this year. Historically, we're about 80% first-year retention. We're going to see a retention rate of about 71%. And a lot of it, of course, are first-year students and just some of the challenges that they face with the online. The second piece of this, and Tim just mentioned it a second ago, about 35% of our students, undergraduate, are graduating with STEM-H degrees. And the challenges that we're facing right now in terms of students, in terms of math readiness, is so real. The things that they did not retain because of not being in the classroom from that senior year, it is very dynamic, and just the challenges that our faculty are facing in terms of helping students and trying to get them up to speed. And so we truly don't know the long-term impacts of this. And Stephen, I know that's another thing that you probably don't want to hear, but that's one of those realities that we all are facing right now.
I just make one add-on comment, and that is, Mr. Beig, that I think online can be very successful, but the key is whether or not there are standards that are aligned with going online. If a professor just turns a course that they had been teaching in person, throws it up on Blackboard and says, here it is, call me if you need me, take the test by clicking on this button, and I'll let you know what the result is. It really doesn't work well for a lot of students, particularly freshmen and sophomores. Juniors and seniors, it works a little better. Master's degree students, it might work. But the bottom line is we've come out of this really establishing more of a standard for what constitutes a VCU online course. Because in the past, it was kind of whatever people wanted to put online, and now we're saying no. And we're getting some significant pushback for that, but it's the right thing to do.
Let me ask if anyone who's joining us online would like, speaking of online, would like to comment.
Yeah, Madam Chair, this is Fran. I don't know that it was intended for me, but really grateful to President Rao's thoughts on ensuring that there are standards as it relates to online, and having met with President Washington earlier today, was compelled by the notion that he mentioned earlier. Students want to be on campus, but not necessarily in class on campus. So I think the notion of some sort of way to ensure that what is being provided to students is the type and quality that is needed.
And this is Siobhan Adams-Gasson from Norfolk State University. I just want to echo some of the issues that are related to the fact that many of our students lost a lot of ground over the 18 months that they were trying to do school, especially those who are entering freshmen this year and last year, actually. And so I would encourage us to think about ways to track those students, support those students, give them extra attention as needed. I think that it's difficult sometimes for faculty to think about the loss because they're engaged in the teaching of their content, and we would want to ensure that students are not left behind.
Another thing to keep in mind during this COVID environment is the non-academic barriers that affect our students. Many of our students, they are happy to be back on campus, and I am delighted to see them. But we still got to look out for the other issues that they may have. Tutoring support, of course, but things like food insecurity and housing insecurity, childcare, these things are real to our students. So as we move forward in this environment, these are things that have been exacerbated by the fact that we have been shut down with COVID. And also the inequities and I'm preaching to the choir, I realize that, but the inequities and technology. You know, all students, the one person that I heard said that they were able to give all of their students iPads. Well, I want you to know I was jealous of that statement. We were able to give many of our students computers that needed it and so forth. But that really did exacerbate the needs in our community for our students.
Last year, building on what we've just discussed, last year we also spoke quite a bit about the mental health challenges. And so one of the gaps you've identified right now is really the knowledge gap, the retention gap, the extra services that are needed in order to really help academically success. What are some of the things that you may be seeing that either are living up to the expectations in terms of mental health needs, or that concern you, or how is that looking in terms of the universities and colleges right now?
I think that the difficult sometimes for faculty to think about the loss because they're engaged in the teaching of their content, and we would want to ensure that students are not left behind.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's difficult sometimes for faculty to think about the loss because they're engaged in the teaching of their content, and we would want to ensure that students are not left behind.
And mental health is the number one thing that most of us see in our student health clinics to begin with. There's no question that it elevated to a new level, and a lot of schools, I think, did a really good job of putting a lot more of those services online, and I think that helped, but I think we've lost a lot of students. So when you hear people tell stories like Brian did about a significantly dropped retention rate, I do have to wonder how many of those students just said, well, I'll wait and see, if they put things back in the classroom or whatever, and how many of them just kind of lost it altogether. When I told you about the student convocation, it's followed by a parade, and I went around, and by the way, they were all putting their faces on mine and said, it's okay, Dr. Rao, I'm vaccinated. They were all wearing masks and that sort of thing, touching me, hugging me. Some of them did more than that. But in any case, the bottom line was, and I'm vaccinated, so I felt relatively safe. But what I picked up from them more than anything is they talked about how, I stopped a couple of them who said, I said, why are you thanking me so profusely? Because I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't get my motivation to look at a screen with most of the cameras off. I couldn't, you used to have us do things together. We can't do anything together anymore. It's just not the same experience, and we need that energy. And Greg and John and others said it very well. They don't necessarily all want to be in the classroom all the time, but they want to do things together, and they want to be together. And we have to remember, we're not 18 or 19, and we're not 18 or 19 in 2021. And we have to try to meet folks where they are and be realistic about their needs. But I think mental health is a much bigger number than we are estimating right now. What students who I cornered said is, I went through severe depression, severe anxiety loops, and I still haven't come out of it. You know what a lot of the sophomores said? A lot of the sophomores said, this is really, really trying for me because I'm in my sophomore year and I haven't met anybody. So I have a freshman year in which I don't know any of the kids in my class. So think about all those things and you realize it's a lot of pressure. For us, it's a tremendous amount of pressure for them.
I would say the other piece of this is the amount of loss and grief that many of these students have experienced, and I'm not sure that they've had much of an opportunity to work through that. And so I encourage, again, for us to think about ways that we reach out that are non-traditional to ensure that students are okay. We just were in National Suicide Prevention Week, and I think we need to pay close attention.
And I would add addiction to that as a significant element that we often don't attribute to a lot of the suicides that you see. I mean, we deal with a lot of that in the hospital context, and I have to tell you the number of students or people at a lower age that are dealing with that is very significant.
We also have to be mindful of the mental health of our faculty in particular and other staff who are frontline with the students, because they absorb a lot of these stories, a lot of this grief that our students are experiencing. And I think that sometimes we aren't as aware and aren't as focused on trying to help them cope as we need to be institutionally. So that's the other element that I wouldn't want to be left out of the conversation.
And a lot of them are dealing with kids, little kids at home who weren't in school. They had so many pressures. It was very difficult for a lot of our faculty and staff. No child care. Wasn't easy.
I have a non-COVID related question, and since we have a captive audience here, maybe you guys can help us with some of the work we're doing here on council. But in our academic affairs meeting earlier today, we received a presentation on open educational resources, OERs. And these are free and accessible materials that tend to be digital mostly, but textbooks, media, other digital assets that will help combat affordability. But, we heard some studies that were done nationwide of students who had traditional textbooks and students who had OERs, and there wasn't any drop-off in terms of the success of the students. On the flip side, we heard that, things like tenured professors are required to be published in some situations, so you're combating that. Just wondering if there was anyone in the room that had any thoughts or strong feelings one way or the other about a move to free or low-cost materials to help the students.
Well, I know, this is Frank Dano from Mary Washington. I know a part of our 6-year plan suggested that this should be a Commonwealth initiative to help provide support for our faculty to really develop these open educational resources. We all know that it's a significant portion of the cost of attendance for a lot of our students, and a lot of students who have financial needs choose actually not to require textbooks for that very reason, hurting their academic progress. So I think it's a good topic for the council to take on, and I personally think that this could be something that all institutions collaborate and get behind, especially if we had resources to help us develop the support we need and to get our faculty up to speed on it.
I'll jump in here, sir. I'm going to guess, and I'm saying this without talking to any of them, that all of my colleagues believe in open source materials and would probably love to have them at their universities at a larger level. And that the challenge is, and it's a good challenge, but it's still a challenge, is that with the idea of academic freedom and making sure that our professors who are experts in the areas can pick the materials, that sometimes that some of them are not as excited as we are about open source materials. And sometimes that's for a very legitimate reason, that sometimes it's in certain disciplines it may not be as good as some of the other materials, and sometimes it may just be because it's comfortable for them. And so I think there's some, kind of internal university, challenges that exist to do this. But I'm going to guess, though, again, without talking to my colleagues, that by and large, if they could wave their arms and make it happen tomorrow, that they all would, and that they just don't have the ability to make it happen like that. But that we're all very much in support and trying to make sure that faculty get a chance to look at the kind of materials that exist so they can judge those materials on their merits, I think is a challenge that we all face. So I did pretty good.
Hey, yes.
I will add that that topic hits our strategic plan squarely in the center. We're looking for equitable, affordable, transformative education. If there's one topic that hits that, it's all of them. It's that one.
Yep. Yeah.
I might just add on that, probably most of you know, but certainly our library colleagues are at the forefront of this conversation. And one of the things that I found is that a lot of faculty might not necessarily be opposed to the concept, but they may not necessarily know what's out there. Right. They are familiar with a particular textbook or set of texts that they've used for years. Yeah. And that's where we have found that the help of our library and educational technology folks has been really critical. And I know Viva has been working collaboratively on this front. So it's another area where I think not just leaving it up to individual faculty to have to figure it out, but having some centralized support and help so that they can be aware of what is actually available.
Yep. Great. All right. Well, we are hitting our time limit for this, a little bit past. Any last comments that folks have before we move on?
Madam
Yes,
Chair,
please.
I just want to say thank you to you all for having these meetings, for bringing us together annually. I think they're very fruitful, very productive. And I also want to say thank you to you and to Peter for continuing to lead the path toward making it easier to be more innovative and transformative in higher education. I think we all wish we could move a lot faster to meet students where they are. And, I really appreciate that Peter's really taking the time to look at the purposes of a lot of processes and things that are designed to protect Virginia and to ensure that we protect students. I also appreciate, though, that we've been able to move a lot faster with technology-related kinds of implementations and technology-related programs where we are sorely behind and really need to step it up and do everything that we can to make sure that we can connect students ultimately with opportunities that they want. And, while 30, 40 years ago, if you surveyed students, 75% of them said that they were interested in going to college to develop a meaningful philosophy for life, and about a quarter said that they were interested in, getting a really great job and accessing the economy. That number is more than flipped. And so we may not agree with it. It doesn't matter. I'm just telling you what people say. And they want access because there's still so many people who are not included in that access. And we think that programs are going to be key to that and how you deliver it. So everything back to what you said earlier when you asked the question about all of that makes such a big difference. So thank you for smoothing the pathways for these institutions to help meet students where they are.
Good. Yeah, I mean, I think, it's absolutely our intention to be able to do that. And, as you all know, we're in this really interesting environment where we've got all of the wonderful benefits of independent organizations with, unique missions and the ability to have a great deal of autonomy, which I think does allow us to have nimbleness that many others don't. And yet at the same time, they're absolutely, and technology in my mind is a big place for this.
Sure.
There's opportunities where I think collaboration, if not joint combined movement,
Sure.
Really is a better way to be able to get the scale, to be able to get the efficiencies, the expertise, whatever it is, that then can be deployed, more broadly. Trying to figure that balance out, right? What that sweet spot is.
Sure.
is tricky, and it's one that we absolutely can't do without, continued, very candid input from folks, to say where we need to step forward, where, that's not helpful. That's just huge. So, right back at you. We appreciate the comments.
We are your partners, for sure.
Great. Well, thank you very much. All right, then let's move on to our next topic, if we're good with that. And we've got Wendy up, who's going to talk to us about some preliminary budget recommendations and institutional priorities.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Great. I want to try to be brief, but also cover some things. We are in the middle of our budget and policy recommendation process, and that process actually started with you all. We started about in May when we issued the 6-year plan templates, and you submitted those July 1. And we met with all of you and want to thank you for your time and your efforts of your staff. We had countless hours of meetings and appreciated those, and appreciate your flexibility and the fact that they were virtual meetings this year, and they were a little bit tougher to coordinate, but hopefully actually a little bit more accommodating, given many of you are traveling great distances for those meetings. I'll talk about a few themes we heard during those 6-year plan presentations, and actually in reviewing your submissions. Those are preliminary estimates you're making in terms of priority areas of funding. We know you're working with DPB right now to submit your budget decision packages, but there's some things we observed. And of course, the council's role is really to look at the whole system-wide needs and how we can kind of bridge those all together and look at recommendations for the system as a whole and areas of emphasis. And it also helps us, as we work with our council in October to approve that, to both work with the governor's office in terms of promoting those ideas, and then if they're not supported originally in the governor's introduced budget, carry that over to the General Assembly and continue that messaging from there on out. So this really helps us in terms of providing some guidance in our work as we move through this whole planning session through April. I want to note a few things. So before we get into some of the themes we observed, we did want to take a note that this has been a very good 2 biennium in terms of the budget process. we estimated it was about $614 million that were added over the last 4 years by the General Assembly. Probably some of the greatest growth we've seen. It was about 7% annually. Our greatest investments were about in the financial aid, so it was about 10% per year. Some of that was from our new programs that were added, the G3 investments, but obviously we had a very significant investment in undergraduate aid that we had not seen at that level in the past. So we're very excited about that. We want to continue with that moving forward. We also recognize that the federal government did give additional support to the institutions and to you all to help you with COVID. One thing that we calculated, it did amount to about $1.4 billion. It's a lot of money. But when we actually looked at your annual budgets across the entire system, that actually, across 3 years, is only about 5% of the total system budget. A lot of money that goes through when you think of E&G, auxiliaries, general fund, non-general fund. So it is a significant investment, but we also knew you had lost revenues and costs over the last few years with the impacts of COVID. So we've been trying to help promote that message as well in terms of, yes, money, but not as big as maybe one might think when you compare it to a broader budget. In terms of themes, just to kind of look at a few of these, we looked at kind of all the areas that you were looking at, general fund and areas that you were investing with your initiatives. And of course, one of the biggest areas is the base operation support. Investments of salaries are always a priority. But also the continuing of the $40 million, the one-time funds was mentioned several times by you. And also recognizing rising costs of non-personnel services was another area that we noted. And some others were noting some technology costs that were coming up and operation and maintenance of new buildings coming online. So just some broad areas. But that was the greatest area in terms of total dollar amount that we saw across your institutions. Second highest area was financial aid, a very big focus on financial aid and affordability to students. And for both undergraduates, some are noting issues with graduates and being able to attract them, and really focusing on the affordability. One that you all just talked about quite a bit, student success, being able to both attract and then retain those students, mental health services, increased advising, better support for transfer students, students with disabilities, as well as just general support services, particularly in the mental health area. Talent pathways, your new academic programs. For the most part, the programs that we saw were in high demand areas. So these are growth in areas that are aligned with some of the state needs that we see, which was a promising aspect of that, both internships as well and work-based learning initiatives being incorporated into those, as well as existing curriculums. Other two areas, equity initiatives, looking at salary adjustments to deal with being able to diversify your staff and deal with salary compression issues, as well as additional staffing to help support diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then some areas with research and community outreach. So appreciate that, those submissions, and it really did help us kind of think of priority areas. Moving into this year, we are just met with our resource and planning committee about budget recommendations for the coming year. In the operations area, we are going to be working very closely with the SCHEVCOP and FAC, your fiscal officers, on those recommendations. We're going to do calculations for salary increases. We proposed to the council looking at about a 3% per year salary increase, and look at the calculations and costs for those. Also looking at ways that we can group together and help institutions with prioritizing initiatives that really do help those student support services, mental health services, as well as the equity initiatives that you identified. So those are things that we're going to be continuing to put forward. We are very interested, our council has expressed an interest in the mental health area, so we are looking at some potential pilot programs that could help expand more clinical hours on campus, and also a partnership with the Virginia Mental Health Access Program. It looks very promising. It works with pediatricians right now, but can do more outreach with your institutions, and already has an established relationship with about 4 of your institutions, more on the research side. So more to come on that, but we're looking at innovative ways that we can help with the mental health services to help provide greater access to your students. I think I'll keep it short to get your feedback, but I want to switch over to financial aid and some things we're looking at there. We are originally, in our current draft, proposing a $50 million increase to undergraduate aid in the first year and $100 million in the second. With the new formula that we put together and revised 2 years ago, the formula is focused on driving more money to the institutions with the highest unmet needs, so those with the students that are more low income and middle income. We think with that investment in the second year, at the $100 million, it would reduce the average unmet need by $740 per student. For the 6 institutions with the highest percentage of low and moderate or middle income students, the average award could be reduced by $1,400 to $1,700. So we really want to try to look at ways to target reducing that unmet need for those students. One thing that we do note is at about the $2,000 threshold, we've seen through some data that the completion rates really can start hitting some tipping points and can really help improve completion rates. So if we actually raise that second year to $130 million, those 6 institutions could get to that $2,000 reduction. So hopefully those are some things that we can also present as ideas and concepts moving forward. We're going to continue to work in the next month on these recommendations and continue to meet with the folks around Capitol Square. Many of you know the term, the Up6 group, and continue to meet with them. Also gain some input from council, our committee today and council tomorrow. But also just want to pause here and ask for reflection from presidents based on some things I said in terms of how we need to think about things moving forward, and appreciate any input that you have or comments.
Wendy?
Also want to invite any committee members, if there were certain important aspects I touched on earlier, to add them as well.
Any thoughts on that list of priorities, things that you would have us double down on, try to ensure that we retain them through the process?
I was waiting for my colleagues to jump in, but I guess I'll do it. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing. I think the emphasis, of course, on financial aid is something that is important to all of us, and so thank you for that. And I think I did hear you mention the $40 million that we got and kind of continuing that, which is also a priority for our group. So thank you. John?
I might just add on financial aid, and I completely agree. I think that's a really important priority. There is a chicken and egg problem that some of us have, which is we can't get those students in the door in the first place unless we have sufficient financial aid. So I hope that's something that SCHEV will look at, because some of us, if I could wave my magic wand right now, if I had more financial aid, I could enroll many more of those students than we currently do.
That's a great point.
One thing I didn't mention, and I'll just throw this out there, one other idea we're floating around is the concept of an endowment match program on financial aid. I forgot to mention that, but brought that up to our committee members. There need to really be some guardrails on it. We don't want institutions that have the greatest ability to raise money to kind of swoop in and take it up. So that was some feedback we also received from council members, and we're very aware. But we did hear there's some other states that do this, so let's try to figure that out, but that could be another way to leverage more aid too.
Can you explain that a little? I'm not sure I understand what you mean.
We've heard of some other states that have looked at an endowment match to scholarships for low income and middle income students. So I kind of quickly brushed over it. But we want to explore the possibility if the state could do a match, of course, how that match would work and what it would do. It could kind of have some long-term dividends. If a dollar investment could leverage other match, and then you'd have that ongoing return. And actually, we had a small discussion with it with one of the institutions during one of the Op6 meetings, and also had a side discussion with one of the fiscal officers. So we are researching that concept right now. There was a program many years ago, about 10 years ago, that was doing a match on interest earnings, which was it's only like $175,000 a year. But it's kind of fallen by the wayside from what I've understood. So it wouldn't be completely new to Virginia. I I forgot the name of the program. It's VGWAP with something, how the acronym was, but it did exist a long time ago.
Yeah, we would be very interested in knowing more about that.
Absolutely. And we'll be working with the fiscal officers a little bit more in detail to get their feedback on that.
I guess there's one other data point to point out that I think was in your overview for the Resources Committee, but as Wendy noted, we've had a pretty good run for the last couple of budgets and seen some meaningful increases in investment by the state. I think we all agree we need more, and if we benchmark ourselves against other states, that would hold to be true, right? We have this target of kind of the cost share of 60% by the state and 40% by individuals. And, we were running at more like 35% before. But with the additional investment and a really important and here, the fact that all of you have worked very hard to keep tuition increases low or non-existent at some points in time, that has moved up from 35% to 40%. Still a long way from where we need to go. But that mutual action, both in terms of the investment as well as the consciousness about only raising tuition to the degree absolutely necessary, I think puts us in a better position, right, to be able to continue to go and ask for additional funding, because in that case, it's pretty clear that the beneficiaries of that were, in fact, students who are seeing a greater level of support. And then obviously we have the financial aid piece. So I just want to thank everybody for that, because it certainly makes us kind of framing this up for the next session easier, and it's just something really positive to kind of show. All right. Thank you very much, Wendy.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, hand the mic over.
Okay. I think as Paula kind of comes to the front, that there was something that really fantastic that came out of the pandemic, and for the presidents, we talked about this a number of times, that our ability to work together to solve the challenges that we have basically heightened during the pandemic. And one of the good things to come out of last year in the leadership of Mike Rouse, the chair, was our Equity and Action Committee from the Council of Presidents. And I know that Paula, along with our two presidents, Donna and Javon, are going to present a little information on that. And so I think you've got the mic, Paula, so I assume that means you're going first.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It is good to see half your faces. It's really good to be together. But yes, thank you, President Abdullah, for giving me that intro and talking about how the council and how the presidents have responded to the diversity, equity, and inclusion needs throughout this crisis. And I say crisis, whenever there's a crisis, one of the best things you can do is communicate. Communicate internally and then externally. And that's exactly what our presidents did. They started talking weekly about what was happening on their campuses, what the trends were, getting PPE out, getting classes flipped over to online. They were communicating regularly and found value in talking to one another. But also they found value, they recognized that there was a common theme to all the conversations, and that was equity. We weren't just talking about quarantine students, we weren't just talking about online education, we were talking about the equity between students and their availability and their access to what they needed to be successful. And so they formed this group, this subcommittee of the Council of Presidents called Equity in Action. I think it was first formed, President Chancellor Henry, under your leadership, and then President Rao, and now under President Abdullah. And so the committee continues to meet, even as the Council of Presidents continue to meet weekly. That used to be a monthly group. Now they are again in crisis mode and meeting almost weekly. And so that continues. And so we're going to hear today from Dr. Gaston Adams Gaston, about what that group has been doing, followed by some comments from Chancellor Henry about equity and the commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout the crisis, and not in crisis and beyond. So I will turn this over to Dr. J. Is she still on screen?
I am here.
Dr. J, good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I wanted to make sure that I had the opportunity to convey what the good work that my colleagues have done in their true commitment to equity in action. And I think the name really reflects the kind of work that's being done across the board as the presidents really look at how do we create equity and how do we make it work. So we started working back in September of 2020, and the group has been very committed to what are the kinds of things that we need to be addressing, but what are the actual things that we can be doing. So a lot of what we worked on in the beginning was the campus climate during the election and afterwards, but there were many, many other things that we addressed, including police reform issues at a national level related to some of the issues of trust that were being exhibited or dealt with, Black Lives Matter protests, how we could on our campuses and of one voice really begin to help people understand and frame the focus of equity for all of our students across the board. So we discussed a joint statement and a commitment that was to be adopted in terms of the president's in higher education. And so in March of 2021, led by our good president friend, John Alger, we did create an op-ed about the role of higher education in civic revival. And that was a very, very strong piece that was endorsed across the board. And so that's the kind of work that we're able to get out, in addition to talking on an ongoing basis about what are the issues? What are the issues related to things like diversity and inclusion training for all state employees? We really believe that all of our state employees need to have that opportunity and that requirement. And so how is that being included in some of the DEI plans that we have put forth? We spent a lot of time with the events on January 6th in 2021 and how they may impact our students and how that might impact our campuses. We also decided that we worked with Paula Robinson, and thank you very much in her role as Associate Director of Equity and Engagement for SCHEV, to discuss equity issues being faced on Virginia campuses. That was very fruitful, and we continue to have conversation there. We also talked about the Center for Free Flag program that has been proposed and how our campuses might engage in that. We talked about, and I want to thank John Alger for the 50th anniversary of the Virginia Constitution, which was a major, major positive shift for the Commonwealth around issues of diversity and equity. And John and I did a kickoff session with Professor Dick Howard from UVA Law, Justice Elizabeth McClanahan back in April, and other higher education institutions also committed to doing some events throughout the year. The other piece is really the continuing conversation, keeping at the forefront of our minds DEI opportunities for change, even in things like vaccine equity, because we had some disparity around vaccines and getting vaccines early on. And it helped to have the conversations and also to provide ways in which we might look at taking care of some of those issues. And finally, I would say we have a program coming up in October. This is a program led by John Alger and James Madison University with AAC&U on cultivating a just and inclusive democracy. Those are the kind of things that we keep at the front of our minds as we work through some of the what feels sometimes like a slog of really focused attention on diversity, equity, and inclusion, focusing on the equity so that all of our students have the opportunity to do their very best and to be members of higher education, successful members of higher education. I will open it to Donna and then any of our presidents who would like to chime in.
Thank you, Dr. J. I think the only thing, I mean, you did a pretty comprehensive overview, but the only thing I would add that we've talked about is some of our institutions where we might have less diversity on faculty and staff, if we could partner with some of our larger institutions who may have graduate programs where they're graduating potential faculty members that we could recruit that have a larger diversity, there's great opportunity for partnership there. So I think those are things that we just really need to build on and work on. But I'm just very excited about where we're headed with this, and I'm excited to be with this group.
Thank you. Any other comments? As Dr. J opened it up to other presidents, any other comments you want to make?
Madam Chair, I just add that, this is full circle with the previous conversation that we have had. All of this will matter if inclusion basically focuses on bringing people to the table who haven't been to the table, finding ways to truly advance the kind of change that all people in Virginia need us to change, because we just have to be honest. It's moved very, very slowly here, and we say the right things. We just need to be sure that we're matching it with doing the right things, and we're not there, in my opinion. We're just not there.
I do want to open the floor up for questions. You're about to say, I'm sorry, President.
Just to add a little bit here, Siobhan mentioned, of course, this relationship between civic engagement, civic education, and DEI and equity issues. And I think that's really an important connection. You think about this concept on which our Constitution was founded, right? We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union. And that's really the work in many ways that we're talking about, is the expansion of that we, the people, to include everybody and to have those equal opportunities. There's a lot of conversation, particularly that has picked up since January 6th nationally, about the need for an increased focus on this in higher education, and for higher ed, frankly, to provide leadership in our society with other sectors. A couple of conversations many of you have probably heard about. There was an initiative earlier this year that was announced called Educating for American Democracy, a major project led by the former secretaries of education at the federal level on both sides of the political aisle, talking about the need for civics education with an eye with this equity lens for K to 12. Now there's talk about how to expand that with higher ed and who can provide leadership for that, and I'll come back to that in a moment. There's another group called Partnership for American Democracy that is new, that brings together, again, on a bipartisan basis, political leaders, business leaders, religious leaders, nonprofit leaders, that are talking about how do we strengthen and sustain a healthy and equitable democracy. And very specifically, in both of those cases, they're looking for higher ed leadership. I've been asked to share with this group that people are looking, frankly, to Virginia because of its history, because SCHEV actually has had a commitment to these issues, to think about the leadership role that it might be able to play. And that's part of the conversation we'll have certainly in October. We have this National President's Town Hall, but to Peter and all of you, if you have suggestions, or we will certainly pass along as we hear some of these ideas. But there's a lot of interest in some state level leadership, and people frankly are looking to Virginia as a likely candidate, which I think is an exciting opportunity for us.
Great.
And I think Virginia is ready to respond. I think that one of the ways that Virginia has communicated through this process is through legislation. That's one of our ways that we are able to communicate. And one of the things that most recently happened in this past General Assembly is requiring that all institutions, all areas of state government have a DE&I plan. So every institution around this table now has a DE&I plan. When we first started with the Equity in Action Group, that was not the case. I think less than half of our institutions had a DE&I plan. And so we were communicating our commitment as a state to DE&I through that legislation. And so I'd just like to ask a quick question to, I'd say, President Abdullah and President Henry, Chancellor Henry, and Dr. J. Through your DE&I plans, how do you make sure that they are actionable and not just another piece of paper that goes on a shelf and we checked out the requirement, we submitted it on time? What infrastructure do you have in place? What strategies are you using to make sure that they are active or action? It's equity in action on your campuses. Anyone respond, and then we'll open up to all presidents to respond.
I'll go ahead and start since you hit me first.
Straight ahead.
I think one is to have it work off of initiatives that are already in place. And so there are a couple of things that we're working on here at Virginia State. In our diversity and inclusion plan, we'll focus primarily on these two things. One of them is diversity and inclusion as it relates to LGBTQIA here at Virginia State. We are gotten very serious about how we make sure that young people and young at heart people feel that they are part of our campus environment so that we can train the best engineers, educators, social workers, and so on. And so that's something that we've already got moving and that we need to move faster and more of. And so we tried to use our diversity and inclusion plan as a way to jumpstart some things that we've already got going. The other thing is that and I strongly believe this, that while amongst the African-American community, Virginia State University in many ways has a national brand, regionally, amongst those who are not African-American, many of them don't know that Virginia State University can provide a quality education for them, particularly when you talk about Hispanic, white, or Asian young people or young at heart people, that they may not see Virginia State University as an institution where they can get a quality education. And so we're committed to also growing and diversifying our student body and our faculty and staff so that more people can be invited into a beautiful house that we believe exists here in Ettrick, but of Petersburg at Virginia State University. So I think one, it's got to at least piggyback off of the things you're already doing to start to move that to a better and more deeper level. And I'll stop.
And I'll just add to that, here at Norfolk State University, we created the President and Provost Council on Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And we did that prior to writing our report, which was faculty, staff, and students, and the president and provost, really looking at what are the issues that we need to be addressing and how might we address those more effectively. Those, some of the outcomes from those conversations and some of the actions were then a part of our diversity plan, and it allowed us to sort of think about and focus on some things that we think are really important. One of those is how do we support the training of faculty and staff in terms of diversity and inclusion and ensuring that that's happening on an ongoing basis, and how do we measure that. There are a number of things, but another piece of that is diversifying the population in terms of those individuals who have been military or may currently be military. We also talked about those individuals with disabilities and how we are uniquely prepared to support them. So really thinking more broadly about what this equity and inclusion and diversity really looks like, and being very focused on it being a community support system.
Thank you, Dr. J. We'll close out with comments from Chancellor Henry.
Certainly. So we started our work really within student affairs, looking at the experience of our students, and pulled together a working group that was looking at that experience. Particularly, our college is a lot more diverse than our surrounding community. And so we wanted to ensure that our students, when they were out in the community, had a good experience in addition to what they experienced at the college, and developed a lot of programming around that. And then we have now elevated that group college-wide. So I have just named a diversity officer who reports directly to me, and we're looking at systems across the college. Our diversity plan has become a part of our strategic plan for the college, just to ensure that it gets the attention that's needed and the resources that are needed to move forward. So we're excited about that. Also, it was important to put somebody with high energy over this, and our new director is fabulous, and so I'm excited about the work that she's doing.
I look forward to meeting her. I know there are lots more comments and lots more stories, as Chancellor Henry just shared, about what you're doing on your individual campuses. We will continue this conversation. I think it's important for the council members to hear the commitment and the strategies that you have on your campuses to address these issues, to make sure that it is not just a piece of paper, that you do indeed have strategies to make sure that change does occur. Just for council members, let you know that we will be discussing the DEI plans tomorrow, so you will learn more about each of the institution's plans and generally what was submitted on July 1. So I just want to thank you for your time, and if no more comments, who I turn this over to?
All right, thank you, Paula, very much. All right, last topic that we have today relates to our graduate outcomes surveys. Just a reminder of the context for this. There was kind of growing sentiment that questioned, given the increase in costs in particular, the value of higher education, both on an individual level, but also kind of on a more systemic basis. And so we wanted to try to get some data to just really demonstrate what, hopefully affirm what we believe in our hearts, which is that there's a tremendous return on that investment, and felt that one way to go about doing that was to survey graduates and see where things are. So we've been working on this with Jim and his folks for 18 months, 2 years. It's
a little over 2 years.
Yeah, a little over 2 years now.
Yeah.
Yep. Like everything, did have a little bit of an impact from that pandemic thing. And
It did.
So
It did.
But we're glad to have you and begin to learn what you're seeing.
Thank you. Well, I brought a PowerPoint, but my person who was going to run it for me has left momentarily. However, it was too long to fit into the time that we allocated. So I will start by just sort of giving some summary on this.
Can I think, just a pause, is everybody okay if we went to like 5:15? I think our next formal engagement is 6, correct?
Yeah. In that case, let me go get a good answer for you.
Okay.
Because I have
All right.
absolutely no idea.
Yeah. Very good.
Right. I'm prepared to shorten it. I'm prepared to.
We'll know here in a moment.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Just start. I'll do that. I've got some notes, and don't quote me on some of the numbers that I pull out of memory. But Jim Ellison from the Survey and Evaluation Research Laboratory at Virginia Commonwealth University. We're part of the Wilder School there. As the chairwoman said, this is a survey that we called Virginia Educated. We started working on with council a little over 2 years ago. It's a big survey. We wanted to look at people who had graduated from a Virginia state-supported institution between the academic years of 2007-08 and 2017-18. It's about 500,000 people. And we had a very large sample to do this job. So these are people who got undergraduate credentials, so a certificate, an associate degree, or a bachelor's degree. And what we're going to do today is just review some of the upshots from the data. It's a very large data set. We are working on a report and an executive summary that'll be out soon.
Hey, Jim.
But, yeah.
And Jim, we're good to go till about 5:15.
Oh, okay.
We should wrap up right then, though, so we have
All
time
right.
for a few other things.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. So today we're going to cover some major upshots, a little bit about the methods, but very little, and then a little more detail on the major upshots we're seeing in the data. We'll do a recap and then talk about next steps. So these are the things that we're seeing right now. We had several different measures on the survey about satisfaction, and satisfaction is good to excellent across these measures, except for general education. Student debt, not a surprise to people in this room, can be a serious problem for people, a significant minority of the graduates. And those who graduated with student debt or finished their undergraduate education with student debt are less satisfied with the proposition that their education was worth the cost. The graduates are maybe more tied to geography than some might expect, especially the two-year graduates of two-year institutions. Transfer is an important issue. It affects, to my mind, more students than I thought it would. The employment numbers that we got seem pretty good. Underemployment can be a tricky concept to measure, and we have a couple of examples of that. And we also want to give a plug for using this data set as a resource going forward. This is a rich, complex trove of information, and what we're going to get out of it with this report and executive summary is not the full sum that others might get out of it with different questions to ask. We also asked a question on the survey about what graduates would recommend institutions do to help make other students more successful. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So the council gave a charge. They wanted to assess the impact and value of higher education in Virginia in a more holistic way than just employment and wage data. We developed from scratch a study and a survey to do that with a lot of great input from a lot of great partners. And you see some of the topic areas that got included in that survey. Okay. As I mentioned, it's a big survey. The main arm was a probability sample, 50,495 students. And we got good response rate. It's a long survey. It's got a lot of questions on it, 127 numbered questions. Some of them have subparts. More than 30 minutes median time to complete the survey, but 91% of the people in the probability sample who got letters to invite them completed the survey if they started it on the web. 74% of those in an email-only supplement went on to complete the survey if they started it. Those folks didn't get letters, they just got emails. It was a less expensive way to supplement the data collection. So we have over 15,000 completions, and we think people did a very good job with the survey. Also, the demographics that we got from the respondents looked very similar to the demographics that we had to start with. We had access to SCHEV administrative data, so we knew what the group looked like. And as we often do in surveys, we weighted the survey data to be more aligned with the demographics that we knew about. So we're feeling good about the representativeness of the data in terms of the demographics. One of the nice things about the survey is that you can ask questions that go beyond the administrative data that you already have. This question is kind of like sort of a quasi-demographic, but we did ask the graduates what was their primary reason for starting their undergraduate education, and about 2/3 mentioned a job or career-related reason, and about 1/3 something else, and you see the breakouts here. So we asked satisfaction in several different ways. This is a primary example here. The question on the survey was, overall, how satisfied are you with the undergraduate education you received? And we thought we got very high marks on that, and that's something that should be heartening to higher ed. 88% agreeing or saying that they're satisfied. This was on a 5-point scale. They could have said they were very dissatisfied, neither satisfied, or very satisfied. And essentially no difference here between the 2-year and 4-year graduates in terms of satisfaction. Another way we looked at satisfaction was to ask for their level of agreement, again on a 5-point scale, with the proposition your undergraduate education was worth the cost. Lower levels, but still a majority, agreeing, either strongly or just agreeing, that it was worth the cost. The 2-year graduates more likely to agree compared to the 4-year graduates. But you don't get that if you break it down by folks who graduated with debt versus no debt. So students who graduated with debt from their undergraduate education, right about 46% agreement that their education was worth the cost across the board, 2-year, 4-year overall. Much higher agreement if you didn't graduate with debt. 74% agreeing it was worth the cost for 2-year, 63% for 4-year. There were 4 other satisfaction measures that we put together in a set. Sometimes I thought of this as the big 6, but we asked about life satisfaction, how well the undergraduate education prepared the respondent for the workplace, long-term career goals progress. We asked their satisfaction with their progress toward their long-term career goals. That's what that one's about. And we also asked about their appreciation of gen ed courses now, looking back. So as you can see, the levels of satisfaction, or the two most favorable responses pooled, are very good for everything except Gen Ed. And there's going to be a magic red circle that comes up on the next slide. There you go. So that may indicate that, you know, there's some work to be done on Gen Ed. If I recall some alumni communications in the last few years, I mean, schools are working on Gen Ed, but maybe there are other things to be looked at there. Did we skip one? Okay, sorry. I'm rather PowerPoint dependent, sorry. We looked at employment, so even though we had the charge to do other topics beyond employment and wages, obviously employment is a big outcome from higher education, so we have data on that. This is just a snapshot here. 87.3% overall in the data set said they were currently employed. There were about 5% to this question who didn't say they were employed. They didn't say they were unemployed. They said something else, other specify. When we clean those up, maybe there will be some more who are currently employed. We know anecdotally from the responses there will be. So we had about 7% who told us straight out they are not employed right now. Many of those were either retired, disabled, student, chose not to work, and so forth. Among those who were employed, we thought these numbers looked pretty good, generally working full-time, jobs relating reasonably well to the discipline they studied, getting benefits. Only 10% are getting no benefits at all, 10.7%. So we thought that was pretty good. Another key employment-related concept that we have in the survey in several different ways is underemployment. The idea that if you're in a job where the job does not require the level of skills or knowledge or education that you have, it's below that, or you're not getting as many hours in that job as you would like, generally, that's a target for being considered to be underemployed. In the survey, two different ways that we're looking at here. One was a self-report where we simply asked respondents, after giving them a little more fleshed out definition of underemployment, we asked them, do you consider yourself to be underemployed? About 12.5% overall said so. Similar numbers for the 2 years and 4 years. But we also had a number of variables in the survey that we could use to calculate a potential underemployment flag on folks. And the calculated version, perhaps as many as 42.4%, would be considered underemployed. Again, fairly similar for the 2 years and the 4 years. We asked those who self-reported underemployed or not underemployed, why did you say that? Why did you consider yourself to be employed? Why do you consider yourselves not to be underemployed? And if you cross some of these things, you find people who are calculated as potentially underemployed, but who don't self-report as underemployed, generally said they didn't consider themselves to be underemployed because their work-life combination is their choice or because their job makes meaningful use of their education and skills. The point here is underemployment's a big issue, but if you're going to use data about underemployment, you might want to really know what were the assumptions, what were the measurements, what were the techniques for determining underemployment. Okay. Not a surprise probably to anyone in this room. Student debt, a big problem for some, but not for everybody. So there's a lot of percentages on that slide. What they basically boil down to is a significant minority of the graduates either still have student debt or had some kind of trouble with it or are currently having trouble with it. And that may range from about 7 to 20% of all graduates, whether or not they ever had debt to begin with. And when you read some of the written comments on the survey that we got, you really do see some very poignant and in some cases almost desperate comments. I was an English major. I know despair and desperation are basically the same word. Sorry about that. That's my bad. But the comments are, they fill in, they kind of humanize some of the numbers. Okay. We had this concept that I mentioned, the graduates are fairly closely linked to geography. Most of the two-year graduates, of course, were in-state students when they did their undergraduate. Many of the four-year graduates were. Most of the graduates in the survey are living in Virginia at the time that they took the survey, more common for the two-year graduates. Among the out-of-state students, 81% of them are still out of state at the time they took the survey. And about 3/4 of the out-of-state students told us that they came to Virginia either from a state adjacent to Virginia, with Maryland and North Carolina being the big contributors there, or one of the more populous states on the East Coast, with New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York being the most common ones there. So fairly closely linked to geography. Relocations certainly happen. We asked graduates if they had changed where they lived at any point after completing their undergraduate education. They're more common for the 4 years rather than the 2 years. But among both groups, relocations, when they happened, majorities of them occurred within Virginia. And regardless of the kind of relocation, away from Virginia, within Virginia, back to Virginia, employment opportunities for the respondent or for someone else, or family and personal reasons not related to employment, are the big reasons for those relocations. We mentioned transfer is important. I personally didn't know that these relatively, for me, high percentages of students would tell us that they had transferred at some point in their undergraduate education. But I'm a survey guy and not a higher ed guy so much. So 42% of the two-year graduates told us they had transferred at any time during their education, and 31% essentially the four-year grads. I think the way that question worked and interpreted, people were thinking about all of their higher ed experience, not just within the one credential that we asked them to focus on for most of the survey. But still, that's significant. And so if the state has goals about moving people from two-year to four-year credentials, if, as the literature shows, positive outcomes and characteristics among the population rise with more years of formal education, then transfers are important to get people up there. And these were the responses, the top three responses the respondents gave on the survey for the kinds of information opportunities or skills that Virginia's colleges and universities should focus on to make students more successful. So personal financial education, workplace skills, meaning salary negotiation, interviewing skills, conflict resolution in the workplace, and then experiential learning. Those were number 1, 2, and 3 among both the two-year and four-year groups. So recap, most graduates are satisfied except for general education. The suggestions that grads made about what schools might do might overlap with gen ed. I don't know. That's something for other folks to figure out. The close tie to geography, transfer being important, student debt a problem for a significant minority, and when it's a problem, it's a big problem, and reducing the perceived return on investment. So just some next steps here really quickly. We've got an executive summary and a full written report coming out soon. We're going to release data tables to the institutions that are going to be very detailed, and I think a lot of institutional research people will have fun with those. We're doing a multivariate analysis, several models that is going to get a little further tweak and review before it's released. Some closeout activities with SCHEV, maybe some follow-up things again. This is a resource that I hope will be used going forward. And just really quickly, I've been doing this for 35 years at VCU, UVA, back at VCU. This is probably the biggest, most complicated, most meaningful, most challenging project in a pandemic, and there are a lot of people who had a lot to do with that. So I didn't want to go without putting some names up there. SCHEV, the support from SCHEV has been outstanding, and I appreciate it. Sorry to try to blow through that quickly, but questions or comments?
That's good. Jim, before you open it up too much, would you say a word about the data match with our administrative data that this survey has enabled?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Yeah, I kind of glossed over that. One of the unique aspects of this project was that we asked all of the survey respondents if they would allow us to match their survey data to administrative and secondary data that Chev has. And about 2/3 agreed to do that. So the data set, even though I focused on survey results today, the data set has additional data that can be used to expand analyses. And it's a lot of that additional data that's going into those multivariate analyses that will be coming out in a little while. But that's a unique aspect of the project. In fact, and we make this statement in the written materials, we're not really aware of any other project, at least in the US, that has this combination of size, breadth, survey primary data, secondary and administrative data, all together in one package. And so we think it's going to be, again, a unique resource that needs to be further mined going forward.
Excellent.
I had one question. I was just curious about the graduate data. Not how old were the graduates, but the classes. So how far back did you go? These are graduates. So what was the oldest graduating class?
2007, 2008.
Thank you.
Yeah, up through 2017, 18.
Dr. Ellis, I was trying to look over my shoulder, and I think I heard you say, though, that 80% of out-of-state students who were out-of-state for undergraduate did not stay in Virginia. Did I hear that?
More or less, yes. The relocation thing gets a little tricky because people could have left, come back, left again. But at the time of the survey, 80% of the students who were out-of-state students for the credential that got them into the survey were living out of state. Yes. So I think it's that's the gist of it. Yes.
Other questions?
I just want to say thank you again to Jim. It's always a very helpful presentation, and I think it enhances our ability as a state to really be more on top of what our students' needs are and better definition of where to meet them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, President Rao.
I think, continuing to demonstrate, the value. Granted, the debt piece, I think, is quite sobering, right? The satisfaction level and the was it worth it question, bifurcated so clearly on that. It will be interesting to see if there are inflection points, within the folks that have debt, et cetera. But I think that certainly affirms our need to continue to focus on affordability and, recognize that both on kind of an individual human level, as well as, a broader, more economic level, that is a pretty damaging situation that we have right now, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very
We had
interesting.
about 15 satisfaction items.
Yeah.
The debt thing puts a drag of about 3 to 5 percentage points on all of them until you hit that one that's most directly related, and now it's a 20-25% gap.
Wow.
Yeah.
Anything else? Well, thank you. We've appreciated
Thank you.
your work, and we look forward to mining this further, and I'm sure we'll be able to use it in all kinds of ways to benefit both our choices around curriculum as well as kind of how we communicate out to our students in the K-12 and things along those lines. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks.
Madam Chair, I wanted to thank you and Chev for coming to hang out here at Virginia State University. I especially want to thank everyone who wore the orange and blue today. Does not go unnoticed, Peter. I want to thank you all for coming. And if, heaven forbid, this is your first time to Virginia State, I hope that we can figure out a way to not make it your last time to VSU. And I'd also like to thank my colleagues. I think this would be officially be the most we've had in a room at one time. And so it's good to see, as someone said, good to see half of your faces today at the meeting. And again, for all of you who, if this is the first time that you're at Virginia State, we hope also that it's not the last. Thank you all for coming to hang out with us. Man?
All right, thank you all, and we will adjourn this meeting. And where are we going now?
Okay, so Makola, do you want to tell us what the next steps are?
Yes, because I think I know now. That's very important.